It had been over a month since the last signal from Earth reached the Sci-Fi fleet. The alien invaders had made their move. They had crushed humanity's defenses with overwhelming force, systematically isolating the planet from the cosmos. Earth's voice had been silenced. Communications had been blocked. Humanity had been forced into a cage of their own home, separated from the universe, and the Zyphar had believed they had won. The Zyphar were a race of cold, calculating beings. They had conquered planets before, and their advanced technology made them confident in their superiority. They didn't care for the messiness of human emotions. To them, Earth was just another world to be claimed, and humans were just another species to be ruled. Their fleet was vast, their weapons deadly, and their commanders unrelenting. They thought they knew everything about Earth. When they had first arrived, they had disabled every communication channel. Every attempt to send a signal to the stars had been cut off. They had no interest in listening to human pleas, no desire to learn about the planet they were about to dominate. Earth was insignificant, or so they thought. The Zyphar commanders were certain that humanity was now helpless. They were wrong. As Earth fell quiet, the Zyphar grew comfortable in their power. Their victory seemed certain. No more rebellions, no more resistance. The human race was nothing more than a distant memory now, their voices swallowed by the silence the Zyphar had imposed. The alien fleet moved on, focusing on new territories to conquer. But there was something wrong. The silence felt too eerie. The Zyphar couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, something waiting, something hidden. They had underestimated the humans. They knew it, but they tried not to think about it. After all, the war was over. Earth was dead. Or so they thought. It was a cold, moonless night when the first sound came. At first, the Zyphar dismissed it as nothing, a glitch in their systems, the hum of machinery, an error. But then the sound came again. Knock. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it was there, and it echoed throughout the command center of the Zyphar flagship. The commanders stood frozen, their eyes darting toward each other. "Did you hear that?" the lead commander, Zior, asked in disbelief. His voice was sharp, tense. "Another knock, knock, louder this time." "It's coming from the moon," reported a subordinate, his voice trembling. His fingers hovered nervously over the control panel, unable to process what he was seeing. "We've never detected any activity there." Zior's heart raced. The moon? The humans couldn't possibly be sending signals. They had blocked everything. They had isolated Earth from the stars. There was no way any human could still be out there. But the knock came again. Knock. The sound was simple, rhythmic, not just a single impact. It was a call, a message, a declaration. For a moment, Zior didn't know what to think. His mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was some kind of human trap. Maybe they had somehow found a way to bypass their technology, sending a message through the vibrations of the moon itself. But that was impossible. The Zyphar were far too advanced for such primitive tactics to work. Right. Yet despite his disbelief, Zior knew this wasn't a coincidence. Something had changed. The humans had found a way to break through. They had found a way to fight back. The Zyphar quickly scrambled to investigate. They sent several scout ships to the moon, determined to silence whatever was causing the noise. But each ship that approached the surface only heard more knocks, more repetitive sounds echoing in the darkness. The knocks were coming from somewhere deep within the moon's surface, far beyond any base or equipment the Zyphar had scanned. It was as if the moon itself was alive, breathing. There was only one logical explanation. The humans had been waiting. They had prepared, and now they were making their move. Zior's grip tightened around his console. They had underestimated the resilience of Earth. They had thought they had broken the human spirit. Now they knew differently. "What is it, Zior?" one of his subordinates asked, seeing the commander's grim expression. "They've found a way," Zior muttered under his breath. "They've found a way to fight back, and it starts with the moon." A series of loud knocks filled the room once more, like a drumbeat echoing through the walls of the ship. It was no longer a quiet call. It was a challenge. Humanity had not surrendered. Humanity had not been broken. Zior turned to his officers, his voice steady but filled with an edge of panic. Prepare for full scans of the moon's surface. I want every inch of it searched. We can't afford to underestimate them any longer. But even as his orders were being carried out, Zior couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Zyphar had always relied on their power, their technology. They had always believed they were the superior force in the galaxy. But now, it was clear that humanity was more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The knocks were no longer just an annoyance, they were a warning. Humanity was still out there and they were not ready to give up. They had found a way to make their voices heard, even when the Zyphar had done everything to silence them. And now, the question lingered in the air. What would the Zyphar do next? Would they crush humanity once and for all, or would they fall victim to their own arrogance? The silence that had once seemed like victory was now shattered. The knocks had returned, and with them hope. The Zyphar fleet was in chaos. The steady knocks that had echoed across their command center were still fresh in their minds. No one could ignore them. No one could forget them. Zior, the lead commander, paced back and forth, his mind racing. Every scan, every piece of equipment, every report pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity was still alive, and they were not giving up without a fight. Zior had always believed the Zyphar were the true rulers of the galaxy. No species, no race had ever stood a chance against them. But these humans, so small, so fragile, had managed to survive the Zyphar's brutal assault, and now they were fighting back. Their survival against all odds was a constant thorn in Zior's mind. The knock on the moon had shattered his confidence, and now he needed answers. "We need to find the source of the sound," Zior said, his voice low and filled with frustration. "The moon is not empty. If they're hiding something, we will find it, destroy it." The command center erupted into action. Ships were sent to the moon, and the Zyphar turned every sensor toward the pale, lifeless orb in the sky. But as they approached, the knocks grew louder, more frequent. The sound had become a constant rhythm, one that seemed to taunt them, like a heartbeat echoing in the void. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a symbol, a declaration of defiance. On Earth, the situation was dire. The world had been quiet for too long. Without the ability to communicate with the outside universe, humanity had felt isolated. But the humans had not surrendered. They had not fallen into despair. They had rallied together in secret, finding new ways to survive, to adapt, and to fight. Deep within the heart of Earth's largest remaining cities, humanity had come together to plan their revenge. The moon, once a place of curiosity and exploration, had now become their lifeline. For decades, humans had been unable to launch any significant operations beyond their planet. But they had found a way to send messages without relying on traditional communication networks. It wasn't just technology that gave humanity strength. It was their spirit, their resilience. They had been knocked down again and again, but they refused to stay down. Every time they were pushed to the edge, they found a way to come back stronger. The knocks on the moon were their message to the Zyphar: "We are still here." The first knock was just the beginning. Now, the humans had begun to prepare for what they knew would come next. They could feel the Zyphar closing in. They could sense the alien forces growing stronger, but they didn't flinch. Instead, they gathered their remaining weapons, built new technologies, and spread out across the moon, creating a hidden base that the Zyphar would never see coming. The knock had become a call to arms. Back on the Zyphar flagship, Zior stood at the front of the room, staring out into the endless void of space. His eyes narrowed as he reviewed the latest scans of the moon. The knocks were no longer just a mystery. They were the prelude to something far greater. "Commander, we've located the human base," a subordinate reported, his voice tight with anxiety. "It's buried deep beneath the surface of the moon, heavily shielded. We can't penetrate it with our current technology. Zior's fists clenched. The humans had been planning for this. They had outsmarted them at every turn. They had found a way to hide, to strike without the Zyphar even knowing. "Prepare an assault team," Zior commanded, his voice cold and commanding. "We're going to end this once and for all." Meanwhile, on the moon, the humans had just finished their final preparations. They knew the Zyphar would come. They knew the alien forces would try to crush them once again. But they were ready. For the first time in months, they had a plan. For the first time in a long while, they had hope. The knock that had started it all now felt like the beating of a war drum, calling humanity to rise up, to fight for their future. It had spread across the moon, echoing through the hidden bases and underground bunkers. Every human who heard it knew what it meant. It was time. The Zyphar fleet arrived above the moon's surface, their ships looming like vultures ready to strike. Their weapons were ready, their ships powered up, and their soldiers prepared for the final assault. But when they descended upon the moon, they were met with a surprise. The humans were no longer cowering in fear. They were fighting back. From deep within the moon's surface, human weapons were launched. Energy blasts, rockets, and makeshift bombs lit up the dark sky. The Zyphar fleet was caught off guard. They expected easy victory, but now they found themselves in the middle of a desperate, unyielding battle. The humans fought with everything they had left. They knew this was their last chance, their final stand. Each blast from their weapons sent shockwaves through the moon's surface, shaking the alien invaders to their core. Zior watched in shock as his fleet began to falter. The humans were relentless. They were unbreakable. Each strike they made seemed to sting, not just physically, but emotionally. How had these fragile, puny creatures managed to fight like this? Zior's mind raced. He had never expected this. The humans were supposed to be weak, unimportant, but instead they had found their strength. They had turned the moon into a battleground, and they were winning. The Zyphar forces began to retreat. They had underestimated the human spirit, and now they paid the price. The knocks on the moon had become a symbol of humanity's fight for survival. The Zyphar, who thought they could silence Earth forever, were now on the back foot. The humans had sent a message, one that would echo through the universe. We are not broken. We are not gone. We are still here, and we will never surrender. And as the Zyphar fleet began to retreat, they realized one painful truth. The battle had only just begun. The battle for the moon had only just begun, but already humanity's defiance had shaken the Zyphar to their core. The once unchallenged alien invaders had underestimated their enemy, and now their confidence was slipping away. The moon, long thought to be nothing more than a dead rock in space, had become the epicenter of a rebellion that was rising higher than the Zyphar had ever imagined. Zior, the lead commander of the Zyphar, stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the screens that displayed the chaos unfolding across the surface of the moon. The sounds of battle echoed through the comms, and the reports of human resistance kept coming in. The human forces were relentless, coordinated, and their weapons were more advanced than Zior had expected. He clenched his fists, struggling to contain the fury building inside him. The humans had always been a nuisance, but now they were a true threat. "We cannot let them gain any more ground," Zior growled, his voice hard and cold. "Prepare for full-scale bombardment. We will obliterate their base and crush their resistance once and for all." His orders were swift and uncompromising. The Zyphar had powerful weapons at their disposal, weapons capable of devastating entire landscapes with a single strike. They would bombard the moon's surface until there was nothing left of humanity's efforts. But as the Zyphar forces prepared for their assault, they failed to realize one critical thing. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future. They were fighting for a chance to take back what was rightfully theirs. On the moon, the humans had already anticipated the Zyphar's next move. They knew the alien invaders would come with their overwhelming firepower, but they had a secret weapon of their own, their ingenuity. Every piece of technology they had managed to salvage and adapt had been used to create one final stand, a stand that would either push the Zyphar back or cost them everything. Beneath the surface of the moon, in a hidden, fortified base, the human forces moved with precision. There was no room for hesitation. Their families, their homes, their entire species were depending on them. The knocks that had first started as a symbol of defiance had now become the rallying cry for the human resistance. Maya, a former engineer, now one of the leaders of the human rebellion, moved swiftly through the corridors of the underground base, giving orders to her team. Her face was set in determination, every step filled with urgency. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We've got about 15 minutes before the Zyphar begin their bombardment," one of her technicians replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked furiously at his station. "We've rigged the EMP shields, but it won't last long. We need to move now." Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They had no time to waste. She grabbed the communicator off her belt and addressed the entire resistance force. "Listen up," she said, her voice strong and commanding. "The Zyphar think they can wipe us out. They think they can silence our voices once and for all, but they're wrong. We've survived their attacks and now we take the fight to them. We have one shot at this. Make it count." Her words rang out through the base, sending a wave of resolve through the human fighters. The knocks on the moon had been a simple sound at first, but now they were a call to arms, and every human who had heard that knock knew what they had to do. Above them, the Zyphar fleet prepared for their assault. Their weapons were locked, their ships positioned for maximum damage. Zior's face was set with determination as he watched the countdown to the bombardment. He knew this would be the final blow. The humans had resisted long enough, but this time they wouldn't survive. "Prepare to fire," Zior commanded, his voice cold and confident. "We finish this now." But just as the Zyphar forces were ready to unleash their destructive power, a bright flash erupted from the moon. A pulse of energy shot upward from beneath the surface, striking the Zyphar ships with incredible force. The ships shook violently as their systems overloaded, sparks flying from every console. "What the?" Zior shouted, eyes wide in disbelief. "What is happening?" The human resistance had activated their most powerful weapon, an EMP blast, powerful enough to disable the Zyphar's advanced technology. It wasn't enough to destroy their entire fleet, but it was enough to buy the humans valuable time. Zior cursed under his breath, the realization dawning on him. The humans had planned for this. They had known exactly how to fight back, how to disrupt the Zyphar's strength. "Full retreat," Zior shouted, his voice filled with frustration. "Get out of here now." But it was too late. The humans were already on the move. Maya and her team had broken through the first line of Zyphar defenses, their weapons blazing as they fought their way toward the heart of the alien fleet. The human resistance was no longer hiding. They were attacking. They were taking back what was theirs. The battle on the moon raged on, but the tide was shifting. The Zyphar forces, who had once believed victory was certain, were now struggling to maintain control. Human fighters poured out from their hidden bases, launching assault after assault. They fought with an intensity and desperation that the Zyphar could not match. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, nor their advanced weaponry. It was their will to survive, to never give up, to fight against overwhelming odds. The Zyphar had underestimated that will, and now they were paying the price. As the human forces pushed forward, they began to reclaim the moon, slowly but surely. Each victory, no matter how small, was a reminder to the Zyphar that they had underestimated the human race. And each knock on the surface of the moon was a promise that humanity would never be silenced. The fight was far from over. The Zyphar had underestimated the power of the human spirit, and now humanity was showing them exactly what they had been wrong about. The war for the moon had only just begun, but the humans had already shown they would never back down. The battle on the moon had reached a fever pitch. The Zyphar, reeling from their initial underestimation of humanity's resilience, had regrouped and begun to fight back with all their might. Waves of powerful weapons rained down from their ships, striking the moon's surface with deadly force. Each explosion sent ripples through the human resistance, shaking the foundations of their base and leaving craters where once there had been hope. But still, they fought on. Maya, now in command of the front lines, ran through the corridors of their makeshift underground base, her heart hammering in her chest. The latest bombardment had done more damage than they expected. The moon trembled beneath their feet, and the walls around them groaned under the weight of the enemy's firepower. She knew the situation was growing dire. The EMP had given them a moment of advantage, but it was quickly fading. The Zyphar were adapting. They had learned from their mistakes and were relentless in their pursuit to wipe humanity from existence. Maya gritted her teeth, refusing to give in to the panic that threatened to rise in her chest. "Status report," she barked, her voice sharp and demanding. A young officer, breathless from running, approached her. "The base is taking heavy damage. We've lost communication with several squads on the surface. We're about to be overwhelmed, Commander." Maya's eyes narrowed and she took a deep breath. Her mind raced through their options, but there was only one choice left. She had to fight until the very end. She couldn't let the moon and everything they had worked for fall into the hands of the Zyphar. "Get me a direct line to the remaining fighters on the surface," she ordered. "Tell them to hold their ground. We can't let them take back what we've already won." The officer nodded and rushed off, and Maya stood alone for a moment, her thoughts heavy with the weight of their predicament. She looked around at the moon base, the last bastion of humanity's hope. It was battered, scarred, but still standing, and as long as it stood, they would continue to fight. Above them, the Zyphar forces were tightening their grip. Zior, still furious after the failed bombardment, had given his fleet the order to crush the human resistance completely. He had underestimated them once, but he wouldn't make the same mistake again. This time, they would show no mercy. He stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching as his fleet moved in, laser weapons primed and ready. The moon was now surrounded. There was nowhere left for the humans to hide. "Commander Zior," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was his second in command, a gruff, tall alien with cold eyes. "We've located the humans' primary resistance base. The EMP shield is still active, but it won't last much longer. We can break through if we push harder." Zior's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good. Send everything we have. Leave no trace of them behind." On the surface of the moon, the humans were preparing for their final stand. Maya stood at the head of a ragtag group of fighters, each one worn, battered, but unbroken. She could feel the weight of every life in that room. Every man and woman here had lost someone, had sacrificed everything. They were the last of humanity's fight, and if they fell, so did Earth's last chance at survival. "Are we ready?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. She had seen the enemy's firepower, and she knew the chances of victory were slim, but there was no turning back now. The soldiers nodded grimly, determination in their eyes. "We've been ready for this since we first heard the knock," one of them said. Maya took a deep breath and looked out at the distant horizon. The Zyphar fleet loomed above them like a storm cloud, its destructive power unmatched. She didn't know how much longer they could hold out. She didn't know if they could win this fight, but one thing was certain. They wouldn't go down without a fight. They would show the Zyphar what it meant to underestimate the strength of humanity. A signal flashed on her screen. The Zyphar were coming. "Position yourselves," she shouted. "They're coming at us with everything they've got. We hold this line, no retreat." The Zyphar forces descended upon the moon with fury. Laser beams streaked through the sky, hitting the surface and sending up clouds of dust and debris. The human resistance fought back with everything they had: homemade weapons, improvised bombs, whatever they could muster. Every shot was an act of defiance, every explosion a testament to the strength of humanity. But the Zyphar were relentless. Their weapons were too advanced, their forces too numerous. With each passing minute, the human lines began to crumble. Soldiers fell, one by one. The base, once a symbol of hope, was slowly being reduced to rubble. Maya watched helplessly as one of her soldiers was struck by a blast, falling to the ground in a heap. She gritted her teeth, her heart aching. There was no room for grief. Not now. They couldn't afford to lose any more ground. A voice crackled through her communicator. "Commander, we're losing the outer perimeter. They're breaking through." She swallowed hard. They were out of time. "Fall back to the secondary base," she ordered. "We need to buy more time. Do not let them reach the control room." But it was already too late. A massive explosion shook the ground beneath them, and Maya was thrown to the ground. The shockwave sent dust and debris flying into the air, and for a moment everything went black. When Maya came to, the world around her was a blur. Her head throbbed and her vision swam as she pushed herself to her knees. The base had been hit hard. The secondary defense lines had been breached. The Zyphar were close. "Commander," someone shouted, pulling her to her feet. "We can't hold them back much longer." Maya looked around at the soldiers who had survived the initial assault. Their faces were grim, but they were still standing. They hadn't given up. They wouldn't give up. "We hold this line," Maya said, her voice fierce. "We fight until the end. We show them what humanity can do." The battle wasn't over yet, but as the Zyphar closed in on their last bastion of resistance, one thing was clear. Humanity's fight for survival was far from finished. They had been pushed to the brink, but they would not be broken. Not yet. The war for the moon raged on, and with every knock, every explosion, the Zyphar were starting to realize something they hadn't expected. Humanity would never stop fighting. The moon was a battlefield, a war-torn, silent place that had once been untouched, now scarred by the fury of battle. The Zyphar's bombardments had left craters, shattered buildings, and burning debris everywhere. The air, filled with the heavy hum of dying technology and the smell of scorched metal, was thick with the weight of loss. Yet in the heart of this devastation there was something unmistakable: humanity's will to survive. Maya stood at the front of a battered but unyielding line of resistance fighters. Her uniform was torn, bloodied from cuts and bruises, but her eyes were as fierce as ever. She looked over her soldiers, the last of the human forces on the moon, and saw the same determination in their faces. They were tired, yes, but they had not given up, and they never would. The sound of Zyphar ships overhead broke the silence, a constant reminder that time was running out. The aliens had pushed them back to their last defensive position. They were circling like vultures, waiting for the final strike. Maya clenched her fist, her thoughts racing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly out of time. But there was one thing they still had, one thing the Zyphar had never accounted for: hope. "Commander, we've lost contact with the outer squads," one of her officers reported, his voice filled with desperation. "They're too close. We can't hold much longer." Maya looked at the officer, her heart heavy with the weight of their dwindling resources. She had known this moment would come, but she couldn't let it end here, not like this. She straightened her back, rallying her strength. They had come too far to stop now. "We're not retreating," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "We're going to fight them where they least expect it." The officer blinked, confusion crossing his face. "But we're at the last line. We have no reinforcements." Maya's eyes locked with his, and she spoke with a determination that burned deep in her chest. "We fight because we have no reinforcements. This is it. This is our moment. We're not just going to survive, we're going to make them regret ever coming to Earth." The Zyphar fleet, sensing the weakening resistance, began their final descent. Zior, commanding from his flagship, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The humans had fought harder than he expected, but he was certain this would be their end. There was no way they could win now. "Prepare the final assault," Zior ordered, his voice unwavering. "Crush them." But as the Zyphar ships lined up for the deadly attack, something unexpected happened. A flash of light streaked across the moon's surface, followed by a loud explosion. The moon trembled beneath Zior's feet, and for the first time, the Zyphar commander felt a flicker of doubt. "What was that?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the displays. His fleet was still positioned above the moon, but now there was something new, a surge of energy coming from deep within the moon's surface. "We've been hit," an officer shouted, looking at the damage to the ship. "Our shields are failing. Something is firing back." Zior's heart sank as he realized what was happening. The humans had set a trap. They weren't going down without a fight. And this time, it wasn't just a single knock. It was an entire series of weapons hidden deep beneath the surface of the moon, powered by their remaining energy reserves. Humanity had been ready, and now they were fighting back with everything they had. On the surface, Maya watched the sky light up with the explosion from their newly activated weapons. The human fighters, scattered across their last defensive line, cheered as the Zyphar fleet reeled from the sudden attack. The odds had just shifted. "Keep pushing," Maya shouted, rallying her soldiers once more. "We have them on the run. Now is our chance." The humans surged forward, charging into the fray with a newfound vigor. The Zyphar were stunned, scrambling to regain control. The energy blast from the moon's surface had disabled several of their ships, and their forces were in disarray. The humans had caught them off guard, hitting them with everything they had. Maya and her team led the charge, storming toward the nearest Zyphar stronghold. The sound of gunfire, explosions, and shouting filled the air as the two sides clashed. The humans, though outmatched in technology, fought with an intensity that the Zyphar could not ignore. Maya fought through the chaos, her breath ragged, her muscles burning with exhaustion. She had seen so many of her comrades fall in this war, but each time her resolve grew stronger. She couldn't afford to lose now. Back on Zior's flagship, the commander's anger reached a boiling point. His fleet, once so invincible, was crumbling before him. His ships were being destroyed one by one, their shields overwhelmed by the human weapons hidden on the moon. "Regroup, regroup," Zior shouted. "We need to crush their resistance now, or we will lose everything." The Zyphar forces rallied for one last push, but even as they began to fire upon the human soldiers, they knew they were losing. The humans had fought through their desperation, and now they were winning. Maya stood at the front of the human charge, watching as her soldiers stormed the Zyphar's last defensive perimeter. There was no turning back now. They had taken the fight to the heart of the enemy, and the Zyphar were realizing just how wrong they had been to underestimate humanity's spirit. The final battle was a brutal one. The Zyphar fought with everything they had left, but the humans were relentless. They had been pushed to the edge, yet they refused to fall. With each blow they landed, the humans took one step closer to victory. In the end, the tide of battle shifted for good. Zior, seeing the overwhelming odds, gave the order to retreat. It was too late. The humans had taken control of the moon, and the Zyphar were forced to flee. The last knock had been heard. Humanity had reclaimed the moon, and with it they had reclaimed their future. As the Zyphar ships fled into the blackness of space, the human resistance stood victorious. They had held their ground against an enemy that had once seemed invincible, but now the Zyphar knew better. The humans were not a species to be ignored or wiped out. Maya stood among her people, looking out at the shattered surface of the moon. There was still much work to be done, but today they had proven one undeniable truth: humanity would never be silenced. The silence that followed the retreat of the Zyphar fleet was deafening. The once frantic sounds of battle, the explosions, the cries of soldiers, had all faded into an eerie quiet. The moon's surface, scarred and torn from the conflict, now lay under a heavy, oppressive stillness. Humanity had fought for survival, had bled, had sacrificed everything they had, and against all odds they had won. But victory had come at a steep price. Maya stood on the moon's surface, looking out over the ruined landscape. She could still hear the distant echoes of gunfire and the crash of Sci-Fi ships retreating into the stars, but it was faint now. The base where she and the last of humanity had fought had been reduced to rubble, the once proud structures now nothing more than twisted metal and shattered concrete. Her heart ached as she thought of all those they had lost, the soldiers, the engineers, the families, every person who had fought and died for this moment. They had held the line, they had pushed the Sci-Fi back, but at what cost? As the last of the Sci-Fi ships disappeared into the void, Maya felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Her limbs were heavy, her body sore from days of constant fighting, but it wasn't just the physical toll that weighed on her. It was the emotional cost. The faces of the fallen, the memories of friends and comrades lost, all pressed down on her chest. She had led them to victory, but it felt hollow. Back on Earth, the news spread quickly. The humans had done the impossible. They had fought back against an alien force that had come to conquer their planet and had won. The Sci-Fi fleet, once thought invincible, had been forced to retreat. Humanity had shown the universe that they would never back down, that they would always fight for their survival. But the celebrations were muted. The joy of victory was overshadowed by the haunting images of destruction left behind on the moon. The Sci-Fi had left their mark on humanity, but humanity had marked them in turn. The battle had been won, but the war had cost them more than they could ever repay. Maya's communicator beeped, breaking her from her thoughts. She keyed it on, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. It was Alex, one of her closest friends and the last of the surviving commanders. "Commander, the last of the wounded have been evacuated," Alex reported, his voice weary but still strong. "We've got survivors from all units. The human resistance. It's over. We won." Maya nodded, but there was no triumph in her eyes. "And the moon?" she asked softly. "What's left of it?" Alex hesitated. "It's gone. The damage is extensive. The base is mostly destroyed. The Sci-Fi made sure of that. We've managed to secure what we can, but we've lost so much. We're going to need years to rebuild." Maya clenched her jaw, looking out at the ruins before her. She had known the cost of this fight, but seeing the devastation laid out before her, it felt more real than ever. "We'll rebuild," Maya said quietly, her voice firm with resolve. "But we need to remember what we've lost. The victory is ours, but it's not the end. We need to honor the ones who didn't make it." Alex's face softened. We'll remember them, and we'll make sure this never happens again." The retreat of the Sci-Fi had been swift, but Maya knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. The war was over for now, but the scars would remain. The universe had seen what humanity was capable of, and Maya knew the Sci-Fi would not forget the sting of defeat. But humanity's victory had sent a message across the stars. They had been underestimated. And now, the Sci-Fi knew that Earth would never be an easy target again. Yet even as Maya stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of their sacrifices, there was something else she knew. The fight for Earth wasn't over. The war had been won, but the real challenge was just beginning. Rebuilding would take time, and it would take more than just strength and weapons. Humanity had to rebuild their trust in one another, their sense of unity. And Maya knew that would be the hardest part of all. Back on the Earth, a new message was being broadcast across the globe, and it echoed the spirit of the humans who had fought so fiercely. A voice rang out from every corner of the planet, speaking to every person who had witnessed the events of the past weeks. "We fought for our future. We fought for the lives of every human being. We will rebuild. We will rise from the ashes of war stronger and more united than ever before. And to the Zyphar, to all who think they can break us, remember this: we are humanity. We are survivors. We will never be silenced. We will never surrender. Maya's communicator beeped again, this time with a message from Earth's leaders. The victory, the unity that humanity had displayed, had been enough to bring the planet together in a way that was once thought impossible. We have won, but we will never forget what we have lost, the message read. The Zyphar thought they could erase us. They thought they could break us, but we have shown them what it means to be human. We are not just survivors. We are warriors. The message ended, but Maya felt the weight of those words. She knew the truth in them. But she also knew that this victory, this hard-earned win, would only be meaningful if humanity stayed united. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. Maya turned back toward the horizon where the last of the Zyphar ships had vanished. The universe stretched out before her, a vast, unknown expanse. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: humanity had proven that it would never back down. They had fought, they had sacrificed, and they had won. And now they would rebuild. The moon, once a silent witness to humanity's greatest struggle, now stood as a testament to their strength. Its surface was scarred, torn, but it was still there, still holding the weight of every sacrifice, every loss, every victory. The Zyphar had thought they could break the human spirit, but they had been wrong. The humans had fought back with everything they had, and now they had won. Maya stood at the edge of the moon's barren plains, staring into the vast expanse of space. Her eyes were tired, but there was a spark of determination still burning deep inside her. The war was over, but the battle for Earth's future had only just begun. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The future of humanity, the future of her people, now rested on what came next. The victory had been hard-earned, and it had come at a price. The loss of friends, comrades, innocent lives. The moon's once pristine surface had been turned into a battlefield, its craters a permanent reminder of the cost of freedom. But despite everything they had lost, humanity had not broken. The human spirit, forged in the fires of war and sacrifice, had proven stronger than any alien force that came to conquer them. Maya's communicator buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. She lifted it to her ear, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "Commander Maya, we've received word from Earth," a voice said, crackling through the line. Maya closed her eyes for a brief moment. Earth, the place they had all fought to protect, the place they had risked everything for. "Go ahead," she said, her voice calm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Humanity has come together like never before. The people of Earth have rallied behind the resistance. Rebuilding has already begun, and there is talk of sending resources to the moon to help restore it. We're not just surviving anymore, Commander. We're building something new. Maya let the words sink in, feeling the weight of them in her chest. They were rebuilding, not just the physical world, but something deeper, their unity, their hope. The very things the Zyphar had tried to erase. Humanity was stronger than ever. But the road ahead was still long. The moon needed to be restored, the wounds of war needed to be healed, and the trust humanity had in itself needed to be rebuilt. Maya had been at the front lines, leading her people through the darkest hours, but now it was time for everyone to take up that mantle. Now, it was time for Earth to take the next step. Back on Earth, the mood was somber, but there was an undeniable sense of unity. The message had been clear: we are survivors. The people once divided now stood together. The war was over, and the message had been sent to the stars. Humanity would not be silenced. The Zyphar had been forced to retreat, and though they had inflicted massive damage, they had underestimated one thing: the human will to fight, to survive, and to rise again. Earth's leaders addressed the global population, their voices filled with pride and hope. "We may have lost much, but we gained more. We gained our humanity. We stood together when the world seemed lost, and we showed the universe that no one can ever break us. The Zyphar thought they could defeat us. They thought we were weak, but we have shown them that we are stronger than anything they could throw at us." The message was broadcast to every corner of Earth. The people cheered, knowing the sacrifice had been worth it. The unity they felt now was unlike anything they had experienced before. Maya took a deep breath as she turned to face her remaining troops. The battle was won, but the scars of war remained. The moon had been their last stand, and they had held it, but now they would have to rebuild not just the moon, but everything they had lost. "We did it," she said, her voice low but filled with pride. "We fought back. We took the fight to them and we won. But our work isn't over. We rebuild, we restore, and we rise stronger than ever before." Her words, simple but filled with truth, echoed through the small group of soldiers who had survived the war. They were battered, tired, but they were still standing. They were still here. And together, they would make sure humanity's victory would mean something more than just survival. It would be a testament to their strength, their resilience, and their future. The war had been brutal, but it had also shown humanity what they were truly capable of. The Sci-Fi had underestimated the strength of the human spirit, and now they knew better. As the months passed, Earth and its allies worked tirelessly to rebuild, sending resources to the moon, sending people, sending hope. The moon, once scarred by war, was now being transformed into a symbol of humanity's resilience. Where craters once marred the surface, new structures were rising, signs of life and hope. The human race had done more than survive. They had proven that no force, no matter how powerful, could ever truly break them. The knocks from the moon, once a symbol of defiance, had become a rallying cry heard across the galaxy. Humanity had fought back, had driven the invaders away, and had emerged victorious. And with every step they took toward rebuilding their world, they carried the memory of the fallen with them. The ones who had given everything for this victory. They would not be forgotten. The stars above, once a symbol of distant hopes, now seemed within reach. The universe had seen humanity's strength, and the knock from the moon had echoed across the cosmos. Maya stood alone on the moon, looking up at the vast expanse. The battle was over. The Sci-Fi were gone, and humanity had emerged victorious, not just because they had fought hard, but because they had done it together. And as Maya gazed into the night sky, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity's story was far from finished. The universe would remember the knock on the moon, and the story of humanity's defiance, its strength, and its unity would echo across the stars for generations to come. The knock heard around the universe was not just a sound, it was a declaration. Humanity was here to stay, and no one could ever silence them again.